Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. The National Intelligence Grid or NATGRID has signed an MOU with the National Crime Records Bureau in order to access its centralized online database known as CCTNS or the Crime and Criminal Tracking Network and System. This will enable NATGRID to access the online database of CCTNS, which contains the data from around 14,000 police stations around the country, thus allowing NATGRID to access all the FIRs and complaints on stolen vehicles filed across the country. So in this context, let us talk about NATGRID in complete detail. See, on the 21st of June, we had discussed how the 2611 attacks had exposed the gaps in India's intelligence gathering. We had discussed how David Headley, one of the key planners of the 2611 attacks, had escaped the surveillance of Indian intelligence agencies despite having travelled in and out of India multiple times, and despite having a frequent travel history to target countries such as Pakistan, Afghanistan and West Asian countries. Even though his travel history and immigration details were readily available with India's immigration authorities, airlines and airports, his suspicious movement and travel history did not raise any alerts because there was no way through which Indian intelligence agencies could access the data of immigration authorities and airlines in real time, and there was no automated system in place which could raise red flags based on such suspicious movement and travel history. The Indian intelligence agencies were completely unaware of his involvement in the 2611 attacks until the United States arrested him and informed India of his role in the 2611 attacks. Then just a few hours prior to the 2611 attacks, the National Technical Research Organization, which is the technical intelligence wing of RAW, had intercepted a satellite phone conversation between a shipping boat in the Arabian Sea and a location in Karachi. But this intercept was dismissed initially as just any other interception, and there was no connection made between the prior intelligence that was available on the 2611 attacks. Then after the 2611 attacks, Yasin Bhatkal, the dreaded terrorist of the Indian Mujahideen, who was responsible for carrying out numerous bomb blasts in Indian cities, was being aggressively tracked by the IB and RAW. But at the same time, he had been arrested at least a couple of times by local police in UP, West Bengal and Karnataka on petty charges such as theft of vehicles, robbery, etc. While he was in the custody of the state police for at least a few days, the central intelligence agencies were completely unaware of his arrest by the local police because there was no such system or platform through which such information could be monitored or communicated. This gap in information monitoring led to the release of Yasin Bhatkal after spending a few days in the custody of the local police, and he subsequently managed to escape India. Later, it took years of effort for the IB and RAW to track him down to Nepal and arrest him through a covert operation. So these incidents have collectively exposed the gaps in Indian intelligence gathering and information processing. These gaps in intelligence gathering were pointed out by the Pradhan committee as well, which was a high-level committee set up by the Maharashtra government to investigate the 2611 attacks. So following the 2611 attacks and following these gaps in Indian intelligence gathering, the then UPA government decided to establish the NATGRID or the National Intelligence Grid, and it started taking shape in 2009 as an attached office under the Ministry of Home Affairs. So the establishment of NATGRID was one of the direct outcomes of the 2611 attacks, which also included the establishment of the National Investigation Agency as India's primary counter-terrorism investigation agency. It also included the establishment of the CCTNS or the Crime and Criminal Tracking Network System, which is an e-governance project executed by the National Crime Records Bureau to interconnect all the police stations in the country and bring them to a common database that enables sharing of information, especially on FIRs and stolen vehicles, between state police forces and the central agencies. The center had even proposed the establishment of a National Counter-Terrorism Center as a nodal agency for dealing with counter-terrorism, and it was supposed to be modeled on the NCTC of the United States. But the proposal had to be scrapped after facing severe opposition from state governments and opposition parties. The other reform to come out of the 2611 attacks was the proposal to establish the NATGRID or the National Intelligence Grid. This proposal took off in 2009, and it is essentially an integrated master database that is coming up, which seeks to connect around 11 intelligence and security agencies of the central government with the database of around 21 service providers. This project is being executed over the last 1 decade, and even though the project has been operationalized in phases, the entire project is expected to go live by the end of this year. So the NATGRID is essentially an integrated master database that will allow central intelligence and security agencies such as the Intelligence Bureau, the Research and Analysis Wing, the National Investigation Agency, the CBI, the Financial Intelligence Unit, the Central Board of Direct Taxes, the Directorate of Revenue Intelligence, the Narcotics Control Bureau, the Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs, the Enforcement Directorate, and the recently established Directorate General of GST Intelligence. These 11 central security and intelligence agencies would be allowed access to the database of around 21 service providers that includes the database of banks, credit card companies, money transfer services, internet service providers, telecom service providers, immigration authorities, railways, airlines, IT records, the CCTNS database of the NCRB, etc. So the article on page number 1 and 9 refers to an MOU that has been signed between NATGRID and the National Crime Records Bureau, which allows NATGRID to access the CCTNS database. As we discussed, the CCTNS was also an outcome of the 2611 reforms, and it is an e-governance project that has been executed by the NCRB under the Ministry of Home Affairs, and it has interconnected all the police stations in the country, bringing around 14,000 police stations under a single database, thus bringing all FIRs, complaints, and information on suspects and their background under one single platform. So the CCTNS database is also one of the databases that would be connected to the integrated master database that has been established under the NATGRID. The NATGRID will allow central security and intelligence agencies to step up their efforts with regard to counter-terrorism, plug the gaps in intelligence gathering, and lead to overall improvements in policing and investigation, especially in terror-related cases. The biggest advantage of an integrated master database such as NATGRID would be the ease with which central intelligence and security agencies can track suspects and collect information on their banking transactions, their property records, their immigration details, their travel history, their internet consumption, their mobile records, etc. Prior to NATGRID, such information was being exchanged between the service providers and the user agencies through servers that are located in foreign countries. This would allow the operations of the Indian agencies to be possibly compromised by hostile foreign agencies, because the flow of sensitive data on possible terror suspects through foreign servers made the data vulnerable to cyber attacks. Now through NATGRID, this sensitive information on suspects who are being tracked can be exchanged between the service providers and the user agencies in a secure manner, because the NATGRID database provides for a domestic secure platform. But along with these advantages, the NATGRID project has raised a number of concerns as well, which includes the fears of mass surveillance by the state and the possible misuse and abuse of the platform by the central government and the central security agencies that could compromise the privacy and data security of individuals and as well as the fundamental rights of the citizens. The biggest concern about NATGRID is that it has been established merely through a government notification and it completely lacks any parliamentary oversight. So there are no checks and balances that have been built into the system to prevent the misuse of the platform. Critics have pointed out that had NATGRID been established through a law passed by the parliament, then parliamentary oversight would have prevented the misuse of the platform by the government. But in the absence of any such oversight, concerns have been raised about privacy, data security, and the possible violation of fundamental rights of the citizens. Then the NATGRID project has also raised concerns over the principle of federalism, which is a part of the basic structure of the Indian Constitution. See, under the Indian Constitution, it has been clearly recognized that policing and law and order is a state subject. But when it comes to the domain of counter-terrorism, there is a shared jurisdiction between the central agencies and the state agencies. This is the reason why the NIA was established as a central agency to investigate all terror-related cases. But despite this, the domain of policing and law and order falls under the state subject, and the state governments are concerned that the NATGRID project completely bypasses the state police forces and establishes a direct connection between the central agencies and the service providers. But the central government has reassured the state governments that the NATGRID project does not violate federalism because it merely allows the central agencies to access certain necessary information which is already available on existing databases. The central government has said that key tasks under the domain of policing and law and order, such as the filing of FIRs and complaints, investigation of cases, etc., remain unaffected by the NATGRID project, and it merely allows the central intelligence and security agencies to access the readily available information. So overall, if the privacy and data security concerns of the citizens is addressed by establishing clear parliamentary oversight, then NATGRID could become a powerful tool in the hands of the central intelligence and security agencies in order to step up India's counter-terrorism efforts and plug the gaps in its intelligence gathering. Now let's take up an article from page number 4, which explains the reasons behind a series of earthquakes that have recently taken place in the state of Mizoram. See, between the 21st of June and the 9th of July, Mizoram has recorded around 8 minor earthquakes that have registered an intensity of 4.2 to 5.5 on the Richter scale. Such earthquakes are not quite uncommon to the northeast of India because most of the northeast of India, including Mizoram, falls under seismic zone 5 on the earthquake hazard map of India that has been developed by the National Disaster Management Authority. This article refers to a study that points out the epicenter of these recent earthquakes and the possible tectonic activity that could be responsible for this. See, as we discussed, most of the northeast of India has been categorized under seismic zone 5 on the earthquake hazard map of India due to its increased vulnerability to earthquakes. This is an outcome of the tectonic activity between two major plates, that is the Indian plate, which is pushing up against the Eurasian plate. It is this tectonic activity which makes the entire Himalayan belt highly vulnerable to earthquakes. But the recent earthquakes in the state of Mizoram have been attributed to the tectonic activity involving two minor fault lines known as the Churachandpur Mau fault line and the Mat fault line. See, a fault line is basically a discontinuity or a crack in the Earth's crust. And any differential motion within the Earth's crust along the fault line, whether be it vertical or horizontal or lateral slippage of the crust, it will result in the occurrence of earthquakes along the fault line. Studies have shown that the recent earthquakes in Mizoram is a result of tectonic activity along two fault lines, that is the Churachandpur Mau fault that runs in a north to south direction between the Indian state of Manipur, Mizoram and Myanmar, and the Mat fault that is located below the Mat river in Mizoram, which runs in a northwest southeast direction, and the slippage of the Earth's crust between these two fault lines, and as well as slippage along several other minor fault lines located within this region, has been held responsible for the recent earthquakes that have been registered in Mizoram. That's the reason why a majority of these earthquakes have been registered in the border district of Champai that is located along the Indo-Myanmar border. A few earthquakes have been registered in the Serchhip district as well, as the Mat fault line that is located beneath the Mat river passes through this district. But experts have said that these minor earthquakes should not be a matter of great concern as of now, because only when an earthquake or its aftershock registers a magnitude of more than 5 on the Richter scale, only then it should be treated with great concern, because that could be a sign of an impending major earthquake in the region. But however, since Mizoram and most parts of the northeast of India fall under seismic zone 5, adequate measures have to be taken as a part of disaster preparedness. As a short-term measure, the state government has sought the installation of real-time seismic telemetry stations in order to track and monitor seismic activity in the state in real time. But along with these short-term measures, what we need is long-term disaster preparedness measures, which will strictly enforce earthquake-resilient construction and building norms in the region. Now let's take up an editorial from page number 6, which evaluates India's solar strategy. The editorial begins by appreciating Prime Minister Modi's personal commitment to promote the adoption of solar energy in order to help India transition towards a greener economy. Recently, while inaugurating the Rewa solar project in Madhya Pradesh, which happens to be Asia's largest solar power plant, the Prime Minister spoke about increasing India's reliance on solar power by making the Indian solar manufacturing industry self-reliant. In the context of this statement by the Prime Minister, the editorial reminds us that if India aspires to emerge as a global leader in solar power, then it needs to realign its solar strategy. The editorial reminds the government that if it aspires to make India a global leader in solar power and solar technology, then it needs to tap into the best technology and resources that are available globally in order to make India self-reliant and a global leader through local production. See, the government of India charted out an ambitious solar strategy in 2010 when it launched the National Solar Mission. Under the mission, the initial target was to achieve an installed capacity of 20 gigawatts of solar energy by 2022. Later in 2015, the Modi government scaled up the target to an ambitious 100 gigawatts of installed capacity by 2022. This was done in order to fulfill the Prime Minister's personal commitment towards increasing India's reliance on solar energy and help India transition towards a greener economy. This ambitious target under the National Solar Mission was declared primarily to help India fulfill its commitments to the Paris Agreement under the Climate Change Convention. Because see, under the Paris Agreement of the Climate Change Convention, India has committed itself to a set of intended nationally determined contributions which seeks to reduce India's dependency on fossil fuels and increase its reliance on non-fossil fuels, and it plans to generate 175 gigawatts of energy by 2022 through green and renewable forms of energy. Out of this ambitious target that has been laid out for the renewable sector, 100 gigawatts of energy is supposed to come from solar power. But a reality check shows that India may well fall short of this target, mainly because of the weakness of its domestic solar manufacturing sector. See, according to estimates, India's current installed capacity of solar energy stands at somewhere around 35 gigawatts. In the next 4 years, it has been projected to add an additional capacity of around 50 gigawatts, and this favorable projection does not take into account the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. But either ways, India is bound to register a sharp deficit even in 2024 as compared to its ambitious targets that have been laid out under the National Solar Mission. India's failure to achieve these ambitious targets has been mainly attributed to the weakness of India's domestic solar manufacturing sector, which is currently unable to produce the required photovoltaic cells, the solar modules and equipment, and this makes India excessively reliant on China's solar manufacturing industry. See, according to last year's data, India's domestic solar manufacturing sector can only help India to add an additional capacity of just 3.1 gigawatts per year. So for meeting the rest of the target of the National Solar Mission, India is completely dependent on China's solar industry. From being an insignificant solar power in the 1990s, today China has emerged as a market leader primarily because of its aggressive policy and strategy. This success strategy of China was based on exploiting both global and local resources and technology with the active support of the Chinese government. Over the last 2.5 decades, the Chinese government has enabled its private enterprises to identify and acquire the latest solar technology from around the world, and it has even managed to ensure the adequate availability of critical raw materials such as polysilicon through imports. Apart from this, Chinese solar companies, with the support of their government, have acquired key solar manufacturers in other countries, and they have also invested heavily in third countries where the required technology was readily available. So along with exploiting the globally available technology and resources, China focused on strengthening its local manufacturing capacity as well by giving equal priority to exports and as well as to fulfilling the local domestic demand. So the editorial is asking India to learn a lesson from China's solar strategy, which enabled China to grow from an insignificant solar power in the 1990s to emerge as a global market leader. The editorial is asking India to recognize the solar sector as a strategic sector similar to defense and other strategic areas if it aspires to emerge as a global leader in the solar domain. India made the right beginning when it launched the ambitious International Solar Alliance during the Paris Summit of the Climate Change Convention, and its membership strength of more than 120 countries is a sign of India's ability to carve out a leadership position for itself in the solar domain. If India aspires to build upon this and achieve its ambitious solar targets, then it needs to adopt an aggressive solar strategy that will promote Indian investments in procuring readily available technology and intellectual properties at the global level. Along with this, Indian solar companies, with the support of the Indian government, will have to invest heavily in third countries, especially in low-income and middle-income countries that are a part of the International Solar Alliance, in order to establish its leadership position with regard to solar manufacturing. The domestic industry will have to be enabled by the government to tap into this readily available technology and resources at the global level, and through strategic investments in other low-income and middle-income countries, India will have to carve out a leadership position for itself. The editorial also says that India will have to make fresh investments in research and development in order to develop newer technologies and trends, such as the development of aesthetic photovoltaic windows, photovoltaic glass panels, and roof tiles that can produce solar energy, which can be used on buildings, especially in urban areas, in order to deploy more solar panels and help India achieve its ambitious solar targets. Now let's take up another editorial which evaluates Turkey's ongoing retreat from secularism. This editorial has been published in the context of the recent decision of the Turkish President Recep Erdogan to turn Hagia Sophia, the historic monument that you can see in this picture over here, from a museum to a mosque. See, this historic monument, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, was built in the 6th century during the Byzantine Empire as a Christian cathedral. Later, during the conflict between the Ottoman Muslims and the Orthodox Christians, the Ottoman rulers captured Istanbul and converted Hagia Sophia, which was a Christian cathedral, into a mosque. This was similar to the practice of medieval Muslim rulers around the world. After capturing new territory, they would convert all non-Muslim places of worship into a mosque. This would end up creating a permanent divide in the society based on religion, and it was designed to establish the dominance of Islam over the native religion. But these religious conflicts of the medieval times, which ideally should not find any place in today's modern world, is making a resurgence, and the current developments in Turkey is a classic example for this. After being turned into a mosque in 1453, Hagia Sophia continued to remain an important Islamic pilgrimage center for nearly 5 centuries before it was closed down as a mosque in 1930 as a part of the secularization drive of Kemal Atatürk, who was the founding father of modern Turkey. In the mid-20th century, when Kemal Atatürk played the lead role in transforming Turkey into a modern state, he sought to re-establish a sense of bonhomie between Christians and Muslims, and he tried to promote coexistence between the two communities by promoting the principle of secularism. Under his secularization drive, he closed down the Hagia Sophia mosque and turned it into a museum that till date symbolizes the spirit of coexistence and brotherhood between Christians and Muslims. This was the reason why Turkey emerged as a modern progressive state, and for nearly 7 decades, it has remained as the only politically stable state in an otherwise volatile Middle East West Asia region. Due to the foundation of secularism laid down by Kemal Atatürk, the modern state of Turkey had largely stayed away from extremism and radicalism. But under the current Turkish president, Recep Erdogan, who came to power in 2002, after his Justice and Development Party won the elections, fundamentalism and extremism is on the rise. Recep Erdogan and his party initially projected a commitment towards secularism, democracy and inclusive development. But especially over the last 8 to 9 years, his government has turned more autocratic and has brought religion to the center of the debate, leading to a sudden resurgence of extremism and radicalism in Turkey. Over the years, Recep Erdogan has acquired more powers to himself by rewriting the constitution and by turning Turkey into an all-powerful executive presidency, which has given him unparalleled powers. Through excessive centralization and autocratic rule, the Turkish government has been accused of targeting journalists and opposition leaders who have been critical of the government. Over the last 4 years, Turkey has made a radical transition in its foreign policy as well. Through its radical shifts in its policy towards the civil war in Syria and Libya, and through its involvement in these conflicts, the Turkish government has encouraged the rise of jihadist elements in these countries in order to suit its geopolitical interests. In 2016, when there was a failed coup attempt against the government of Erdogan, Turkey accused the United States and its Central Intelligence Agency for staging this coup, and after this failed coup attempt, Erdogan has turned more authoritative, and since then he has been consistently seeking to strengthen his declining image. So this is what leads and motivates the Turkish government to strengthen reactionary and extremist elements, and of late it has been projecting the idea of reviving the lost glory of Turkey, which poses a direct threat to the principle of secularism. By seeking to convert the Hagia Sophia Museum, which has symbolized bonhomie and friendship between the Christian and Muslim communities, back into a mosque that would be exclusive to the Muslims, Erdogan is seeking to reopen the old wounds, which not only threatens to rip open the Turkish society, but could also have long-lasting consequences for the entire region as well. Now let's take up an article from page number 10. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court has said that persons with disabilities are also socially backward, and hence even they are entitled to the same relaxation benefits that are given to scheduled caste and scheduled tribe candidates in public employment and education. So kindly note down this observation of the Supreme Court, as it can be very important when you're writing mains answers on the topic of reservation. Now let's take up the practice questions for the day. Which of the following statements are correct? Paddy is seen as a water-intensive crop. Paddy cultivation is linked to air pollution and as well as methane emissions. Shifting paddy cultivation from the traditional transplantation method to direct seeding of rice or DSR technique is said to eliminate the need for stubble burning post-harvest. All the three statements are correct. Option D is the right answer. See, in paddy cultivation, the seeds are allowed to germinate in a controlled setting, and later the germinated crop is transplanted into the actual rice fields, which are completely saturated with water. Such waterlogging is essential for transplantation technique of growing paddy. So this makes the paddy crop water intensive, and it is also responsible for large-scale methane emissions, which is a greenhouse gas, because constant waterlogging makes the paddy field essentially a wetland, wherein the organic matter is only partially decomposed, resulting in the large-scale emission of methane gas. Then according to this article on page number 1, under the traditional transplantation technique of growing rice, the harvest of the crop takes a longer time, and this leaves a very small window for the farmer to clear the stubble in order to prepare the field for the next cropping season. So due to the narrow window available for the next cropping season, the farmer resorts to the practice of stubble burning in order to clear the stubble and prepare the field for the next season, and this results in excessive air pollution. But according to this article, a few farmers in Punjab have shifted to the direct seeding of rice technique or the DSR technique, and they have moved away from the transplantation technique. And this provides a number of benefits, because when the seeds are directly planted in the field, it requires less water, there is no need for waterlogging, and the crop matures at least 2 weeks earlier, which gives sufficient time to the farmer to clear the stubble, and hence there is no valid reason for them to burn down the stubble. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? Pradhan Mantri Vaya Vandana Yojana is a government subsidized pension scheme for ensuring guaranteed interest income for senior citizens. It is implemented by the State Bank of India. Amongst the given statements, the second statement is incorrect, because this pension scheme is implemented by the Life Insurance Corporation of India and not the SBI. So the correct answer is option A, 1 only. This question has been asked because on page number 3, the Department of Financial Services of the Ministry of Finance has published an ad that highlights the benefits of the Pradhan Mantri Vaya Vandana Yojana. This government subsidized pension scheme guarantees a returns of around 7.4% to senior citizens. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? A diplomatic bag or pouch is a container which is used for carrying official correspondence or other items between a diplomatic mission and its home government or other diplomatic official entities. It is externally marked to show its status that the bag has diplomatic immunity from search and seizure as codified under Article 27 of the 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. A diplomatic bag must never be opened by the customs authorities and security agencies, even on suspicion of abuse. It is often escorted by a diplomatic courier who is similarly immune from arrest and detention. All the 4 statements are correct, so option D is the right answer. This question has been asked because we have an article on page number 8 that refers to the recent seizure of around 30 kgs of gold by the Indian customs in Kerala. This huge amount of gold was being smuggled into Kerala by using the diplomatic bag of the United Arab Emirates as a cover. These diplomatic bags were supposed to be delivered to the UAE's consulate in Kerala, but as it turned out, the diplomatic immunity granted by the Vienna Convention to diplomatic bags was being misused for smuggling gold. As of now, the consular officials of the UAE government and the Foreign Ministry of UAE have denied any involvement in this episode, and considering the national security implications of this incident, the National Investigation Agency has taken over the case. Now let's take up a practice question from the 2016 prelims paper. What was the main reason for the split in the Indian National Congress at Surat in 1907? Introduction of communalism into Indian politics by Lord Minto, extremist lack of faith in the capacity of the moderates to negotiate with the British government, foundation of Muslim League, Aurobindo Ghosh's inability to be elected as the president of the INC. Amongst the given statements, option B is the right answer. This is a pretty straightforward question on the Surat split. This split occurred between the extremist and moderate factions of the INC because the extremists did not believe in the approach of the moderates, which was to achieve self-rule through negotiation and talks. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, can NATGRID transform India's counter-terrorism and policing architecture? Analyze. The second question, India's solar strategy should look at tapping the best globally to make locally. Discuss. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.